Hey everybody, it's Honesty, and we are going over the Connecticut Kings, and we are on the last book of this release, which is called Offensive Formations by Christina C. Jones. And I've got a lot of feelings. I have a lot of feelings. Attorney General, how are you doing today?
I'm good. And can we start with two PSAs before we dive into the book?
Yes, I actually have some PSAs of my own, so please go ahead.
Okay, so first and foremost, happy heavenly birthday to Prince. Today would have been
Yes,
his
indeed.
63rd birthday. May he
Yes,
continue to rock in peace, purple rain forever.
for sure.
And then second, and I suspect that you and I share this, right? Huge shout out to Love Belvin. I don't know if she'll listen to the ones that we do on the CCJ books, but just I know that we were both just brimming over with love and adoration and just like, oh my God, that
Yes,
she enjoyed the discussions and went so far as to tell her followers on Facebook and Instagram about the podcast and how much she enjoyed our discussions. But I know you and I were both just tickled pink that she heard us discussing her work and her characters and enjoyed the discussion. Whether we like the characters or not, she
yes.
enjoyed the discussion. So I was just very humbled by that, and glad that she enjoyed it. And shout out to everyone who has since reached out to let us know that they listened and they enjoyed
Mm-hmm.
it.
Mm-hmm.
Because I know we haven't said that we appreciate people listening. I think that's kind of implied, but let me explicitly say how much I appreciate that people have listened and enjoyed listening. Everybody's time is precious,
Yes.
and time that you take away from books is
Yes.
even more precious. So glad that people have enjoyed listening. Appreciate the folks who've taken the time to reach out. Love them. Love the folks whether you reached out or not. And I just thought it was important to acknowledge that. Now that I've unmasked myself, so to speak,
You
you and I
did. You
both.
let the world know who you are, although you'll always be Attorney General to me. But on
Yes, yes.
Facebook, on Facebook, you did tell the people who you are, and I echo your sentiment. And let me know if I'm too loud. I'm at an alternate location. I'm not in my regular Honesty Price Palace. So if I'm a little off, that's why. But I people came into my DMs, into the comments, and I'm sure they did the same for you. And it's been a really fun couple days hearing everybody's feedback and critiques because
Yep, yep.
my some of my announcements are about people who were like, well, y'all didn't talk about this or you forgot about that. So do you feel okay to go into that?
Sure, sure.
Okay. So I have three. So the first one is about Love's an eligible receiver, and the comment that we got was that Parker's motivation for taking care of Jimmy was, I guess, rebellion against her mother because her mother didn't take care of her father. Parker felt that like that was terrible, and Inga really was on her feminist, womanist path.
Hmm.
And this particular reader felt like, and I should have gotten her name down, felt like that was her primary motivation, and that should have made its way into the conversation. What do you think?
It was a point well taken. I don't know that I fully agreed. I remember Parker reflecting on that. But it was because I thought when she thought about how Inga behaved towards her grandfather, that was her father, right? That's how Inga
Mm-hmm.
behaved to her father. And I understood Parker not being able to understand how Inga turned her back on her father in that way while he was dying. To
Yes.
me, that is an apples and orangutans comparison between
You
the
get on my nerves.
grandfather and Jimmy,
You get on
right?
my nerves.
So I mean, but kind of going back to something that Love said, right, about how we all get to interpret the characters and their motivations, however we as the reader interpret them, right? And
Yes,
she
yeah.
takes, she has no dog in that particular fight in terms of how the readers then interpret. So I appreciated that perspective. She was right because Parker does
Yeah, she speaks
refer to
to it.
that. I just don't think, from my perspective, I didn't think that got us all the way there in terms of explaining the why.
Yeah,
of
the long
her
suffering
choosing to
nature.
stay. Right,
Yeah,
because again, my what I didn't understand, and I listened to it again, it wasn't, it was not so much the commitment to take care for Jimmy. What I didn't understand was continuing to stay in the house, right,
right.
when the kids were ratcheting up threats. That's
Yeah,
where the disconnect happened for me. But
yeah.
what were your thoughts?
Same as yours. I listened to it again too, and the point that you made about the housing being insecure, to me, I think her housing wasn't insecure because she always had money.
Yeah,
She
that's
could have
fair.
left whenever she wanted, but she was choosing not to. I think had she not had that nest egg, maybe it would have been like, okay, I can't fool with y'all. Y'all play too much. You know what I mean? But to the point about her spiting her mother, I think that might have been why she started it. I don't think that was why she was finishing it.
Mm, okay.
Because her
Okay.
mother talked to her about, her plans in school and what are you doing? And you're a cheerleader with this old man and blah, 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 and being taken care of and not kind of having your own active life, that you are sort of his toy or his trophy, and that did fly in the face of and then to have experienced abuse at his hand and stay, like, all of that was very anti-Inga. But I think that might have been 15 minutes of the motivation, but once she really got into the groove of this caregiver thing and like, this is the life I'm living, I don't think that was a part of her, that wasn't driving her anymore, I don't think.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay.
The second is that we didn't talk about the Jimmy scene when Jimmy comes to the house, and not Jimmy,
Eli.
Eli. We didn't talk about the Eli
Mm-hmm.
scene when Eli comes to the house and Parker gets him told. And no, we didn't talk about it, but my thought on it is it's nothing for me to say because Parker let him have it.
Agreed. Agreed. I agree 1,000% that her point was, if you were going to stick your beak in, you should have
Hmm.
stuck your beak in at the beginning. You didn't say anything, so please don't have anything to say now. I agree.
Right.
Parker said it better than any of us could have. Yep.
Yep. Exactly.
And I think that was Sean Chadwick, if I remember correctly, because Sean is in a couple of the book groups
Yes.
on
Yes.
Facebook.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
And so the last thing that I'll talk about before we get into offensive formations is, I was able to, I spoke with a lot of people. There's a woman named Megan on Twitter. So Megan, if you're listening, we had a really good conversation on Twitter about Nadira and Lons. But then, somebody came into my DMs. I don't know if you know this lady. I think she runs Bourbon Street Bookers.
Yes.
Okay, so
Ayana.
so she came into my DMs and she gonna tell me that her and Ezra are together.
Oh, yes. Oh,
Now,
yes.
I
Oh,
thought that was
yes.
some foolishness. And then she gonna turn around and tell me she sent to me a Love Bell and did
Yes.
her a happy birthday thing and
Yes.
called her Ayana Carmichael. And what I
Yes.
didn't express to her in DM, I'm gonna do it here, and then I'm gonna reach out to her once the show is live. The thing that I need her to understand is that flesh and blood have not revealed to me. You understand? My status with Ezra, okay? So all what you're doing is in the natural. I am in the spiritual. Do you hear me?
Now, see, and you might want to get Genesis Woods in on this discussion
Oh
as well,
Lord.
because Ayana and Genesis Woods routinely go at it about who is truly the first lady.
Oh
So we
Lord.
might have to do a whole show just y'all arguing about
But
who does Ezra belong to, because y'all trying to turn Bishop into community peen, and
and he
many of
is
us are
not.
not here for it. We are not here for it.
He is
So
not. No, what I would say is this. I had told her, I said, when we do that series, I said, I'm not going to speak to my relationship with him at all. I'm just going to keep it about the book. But the reason I'm not going to speak to my relationship with him is because it's real and I don't have to prove to y'all who
oh
he
Lord.
is to me. And so it's cool with me that y'all think y'all have something that y'all have. What does the song say? He's mine. You may
Oh
have had
God.
him once, but I got him all the time. Anyway, okay.
You didn't just throw in a Moke and Steph reference, did
I
you?
absolutely threw in Mocha stuff. I absolutely did because it was apropos. It fit the moment.
I can't. I can't. I
Anyway,
can't.
but I said I'm not gonna do the most when we do Ezra. I'm gonna behave myself. I'm gonna talk about the book. I'm actually gonna reread it so I can be ready because I know the saints are gonna come for us. But
Yes.
anyway, I thought
Yes.
that was really funny. She seems like a really cool person. So I had
She
fun
is,
kind of chatting back and
and
forth with her.
Yes, and shout out to Bourbon Street Bookers because I know that they, share the podcast on their IG, and also on the Facebook page, Ayana and Allegra, just hilarious and beautiful spirits, and I adore them, even with Ayana's craziness over Ezra. And that's all we're gonna say about that, and then we're gonna move on.
We'll
We're
move
gonna move
on.
on.
Okay. So we're talking about offensive formations, and I tried really hard to put together an overview. I don't have a coherent or cohesive kind of, I usually have like a real good his side, her side. But what I will say is that this whole book to me was about people having chips on their shoulder, grief, being haunted by the past and tormented by the
Mm,
prospect of the future. And
mhm,
that makes it sound like it's heavy. It's not, it's a little heavier than what you would expect of Connecticut Kings, but then so was Love's Encroachment.
mhm,
So I was very much it was a wide story.
yeah.
It was wide and it was ambitious, and I was okay with all of that. So I don't have like a she's this and he's that, will they be together? Just know that they end up together. And there was a lot of angst and torment, especially in the first half of the story. What were your impressions?
Just another, gosh, CCJ, right? She
Home
just,
run. She knocked it out of the park.
yeah. And so, I know we normally start with like what I love, but I will tell you right out the gate, I thought I was reminded, and we've seen Love and we've seen other Black authors do this phenomenally well, right?
Hmm.
Teaching real life lessons or
Yeah.
reminding us of real life lessons in the context of these fictional stories, because I
Yeah.
thought there were a couple of adages and or lessons that, whether it was your mother, your auntie, whatever,
Hmm.
whoever the elder was in your life that tried to teach you some things, there were reminders of that in starting with the podcast episode,
Hmm.
right? The incident, because not listening to your gut will
Yeah.
bite you.
Every time.
And that's, I don't know about you, but that was a lesson I had to learn the hard way several times before I finally started listening to my gut.
Mm.
Be careful of the company you keep,
Yep.
again. Um, and another one that I have come to appreciate more and more, and I've tried to convey to like my nieces and my stepson, all of whom are in their early 20s. The danger when you knowingly make questionable decisions, the problem is we think we've game planned it out, right?
Yes.
We've done a risk assessment and we've said to ourselves, I've weighed the pros and the cons of this, and I don't think the cons are that bad.
Hmm.
So I'm going to, even though my gut is telling me not to, I'm going to go ahead and do this because I think I have factored in everything that could possibly happen, right? I
Yeah.
think that's the process that we go through in our minds when we logic ourselves out of following our gut. The
Hmm.
problem is that once the train leaves the station,
That's
right?
it.
You have no control over where it's going to go. And again, that is a lesson I've learned the hard way of when I didn't listen to my gut, when I made a decision that I thought I had thought through all the factors and whatnot, and something happened that I could not have factored in, right? That I
Hmm.
could not have considered. And I'm sitting there stuck on stupid, like, this is not how I thought this was going to go. So even though the way that played out was, it was a lot more dramatic, right? Obviously, this is a fictional story. It was incredibly entertaining. Tegan's clapback was just one for the gods, right? Because no
Yes.
one outclaps a Black woman,
Never.
right? But I just marveled at those home truths, right? Those
Hmm.
applicable life lessons that were
Hmm.
being taught in the context of this fictional podcast situation where you're watching this train wreck unfold and you're just like, no, no,
Hmm.
no.
Hmm.
But you can we can I think we can all reflect on situations in our own lives where we were in Ambrose's shoes,
Yep.
right, from the very beginning, and the gut is saying, don't do that, don't go there, hanging with
And
people that we don't even like that, and finding ourselves in a situation where you're like kicking yourself because you're like, why did I do this?
yeah,
um
and I think it is because that is the first seed. that's planted in terms of him really not being on sure footing
Yeah.
um, in his life in general.
Yep.
So what I mean by that is he's has a sexual friendship with a woman who he cares about, but he's really neither here nor there about her.
Right.
She's more here and he's more there,
Yep.
which is not a sure foundation. We eventually see him having a conversation, and now the person who he has the conversation with, maybe it's Jordan, where he
Yeah.
thinking about like, why am I still trying to be in this game? What am I here for? What am I really trying to accomplish with this? And he talks about how he had isolated himself and he was focused on regaining what he had and not
Yeah.
necessarily on what his future would be,
Yeah.
and we get a whole lot more of that. But imagine, having this career end what should have been a career ending injury, ending up on the practice squad only because of who your father was. So that's not even a sure foundation because you're there because of him and not because of you.
Right.
And then rehabbing, which is not a sure foundation because you're not sure if you're ever going to get back to where you were. And
Mm-hmm.
then Ava having met under the similar circumstances, that's not a sure foundation. And then coming back to the team or trying to get back on the main squad and having to really show off, you're not sure what they're looking for. Like it was all nebulous. And so while he's trying to find out who he's going to be now, somebody invite him somewhere and he go. But
Yes.
had he not been in such a precarious place and almost, and then his mom and daddy got all the stuff, had everything not been so up in the air and crazy, he never would have went because he would have had some real
Agreed.
friends to spend his time with.
Well, and he also, I think to your point, because we see that Ambrose is not, he's not some flighty
Hmm.
um leader. He's not a follower, excuse me. He's not a
Exactly.
follower, right? But to your point, he's in this weird space. And so you see the thought process as Kyle is talking to him about going to do this podcast and how Ambrose logics himself
Yes.
into ignoring his gut and following Kyle. And that just
Exposure,
backfired. Exactly. Yeah.
getting up his media profile with some
Yeah.
dummies. These people is dumb.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, even though we got the drop in of that in Love's Encroachment, I felt like this was such a great place to meet him
Yes.
and
Yes.
to get the backstory of, and because we see her first on the court with her dad's best
Hmm.
friend who's then her coach. But I think when we get him, it's here. This might be the first time we see him, or he's working out. It's one of the
Right.
others, something like that.
Yeah. He's working out. Hmm.
Yeah, but I thought this was a great entry. So, what other impressions did you have?
Um, another theme that we talked about in other books, how parent stuff,
Yeah,
either
listen,
intentionally or
listen.
unintentionally, imposed on the kids.
At the end of my notes, I have the moral of the Connecticut Kings. The whole thing is don't have parents. If
Oh
you can figure
gosh.
out how not to have parents, you're gonna be all right. Because in the Connecticut Kings, like literally every story, and I'm sorry to cut you off, but this really, really hit me as I was reflecting. All of these folks are elite athletes. They are
Yep.
in the top 0.01%, which means they've been doing this since they was 3 and 4,
Yep.
which means that they didn't get to form appropriate relationships with their peers. They didn't get to, develop emotionally. Because when you're a child athlete or adolescent and then growing into an elite adult athlete, nothing matters more than your sport.
Yeah.
And so there's so much shrugging off. Don't worry about it. We'll do it later. We'll do it later. We'll think about it later. I'll feel it later. I'll do, so that you can get back out on the field or back out on the court. And your parent, depending on, I think Will is the only person, not the only person, but Will has some good parents. But like almost everybody, and Ramsey does too, but almost everybody has some stuff with their parent. And to the folks who are listening, if you have a kid in Pop Warner or soccer or softball, that you spend all of your Saturdays driving this kid. You know what I mean? It's a whole culture and life around getting a kid from trying a sport at 2 and 3 and 4 to being at the highest echelon of it, and you
Yeah.
do not come away with that without scars.
Yeah. And to your point, because this was both the intentional and unintentional, right? Because I
Yes.
felt like while Ambrose's the baggage that he had from his parents were clear cut, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that was very much in our face. With Tegan, some of it was her imposing on herself what she felt she needed to do to vindicate her
Absolutely
father's
right.
legacy, right? So it wasn't clear that it was so much that dad was like, this is what you're going to be. I want you to do
Mm-hmm.
this. It was, but she had clearly taken that on herself and said, the world did not appreciate his greatness. And I am going to be the one that, brings our family name back into the light. I am going to make people remember, what an amazing trailblazer my
Mm-hmm.
father was. So that's why in my notes I had both the intentional, which the Vonda and Amos
Mm-hmm.
situation on Ambrose, and then possibly unintentional because she also reflects on her father, you know, battling with addiction and
Mm-hmm.
some of that, and she didn't really dig deep into how that affected her. But you can't have a parent battling an addiction and
Mm-hmm.
that not touch you and leave an imprint on you as a child, right?
Well, I think we do see one example of her being affected is when, and we didn't jump all the way in, but it's okay. When they go to the first photo shoot, which I thought was brilliant, the whole anything you could do, I can do better. I thought that was
Yes,
so
yes,
smart,
love
and
that,
it
love
was
that.
well done. And Taj comes up, and of course, when we get to the list of who needs to be stabbed, I'm gonna change the name to who needs to be murdered. But Ambrose can tell that she needs a minute. He can tell that the smile is too bright and the grin is too
Yes,
wide and the laughter
yes.
is a little bit too gregarious. And because he has his own experience with that. But I feel like for her, the seeds of that were planted with her dad because you cannot see your father struggling with addiction the way that it looks like he ultimately ended up struggling without learning how to cover that up in order to get back onto that clay.
You're probably right. You're probably right. That might have been. That might have been part of the recipe, right? Because
Yeah, because
going back to being a child athlete, right?
mm-hmm,
It's that, it's having a parent with addiction, right?
mm-hmm.
It is the domestic survivor,
Yes,
domestic abuse survivor, and all
yes,
that comes with that. So I think that
yes,
was another piece of it. But yeah, you're probably right that her father's addiction played into the mask that she learned
yep,
how to put on
yeah.
quickly,
Because
and the only reason.
nobody's talking about that. You don't talk about, oh, girl, last night was real rough. My father was throwing up. My mother
Right,
couldn't, da 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 da. But
right.
I'm gonna be all, you get in the zone. Like,
Yeah,
and so when somebody say, how you doing? I'm ready to play. I'm ready to win. You know what I mean?
yeah,
And so I feel like the season that we're definitely in, and we don't know how old she was when all of that was happening. But anyway, yeah, that was something that stuck out for me. Go ahead.
yeah, yeah. Keeping in touch with the why. I think that's
Mm.
another life lesson, right?
Mm-hmm.
Why are you doing this? Why are
Yeah.
you doing this? Right? And for both of them, needing to be real and be candid with themselves about the why.
Yeah.
Because at a certain point, I have to tell you, at a certain point, I was wondering if Tegan was going to conclude that ultimately her why was more so tied to her father's legacy. And as is it Patricia, Catricia,
Yeah, I think yeah.
the
Cat is
legend.
what she ends up. Yeah, Cat Martin.
Yes, Kat. The legend. When she pitches the idea of, let's come together and create
Mm-hmm.
something that's going to encourage more, young black women and men to get into tennis. There was a point where I was wondering, is T going to conclude that she can vindicate her father's legacy without continuing to play? Is
I
she
thought so
going
too.
to, right? I was wondering if it was veering in that direction the same way when Ambrose, has a
Yes.
moment. And I want to get into that a little bit later because that resonated with me for a slightly different reason. But him also, just after he has the conversation with Ramsey, it's Ramsey who he has the conversation with about his why. Why are you continuing to do this? And him being honest and saying, I don't know. Like for so long, it was about proving a point to my father, and then it was to spite my father.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm releasing myself of all of that.
Yes.
And I need to rediscover what my why is. Because again, I think that applies to us in life,
Mm-hmm.
whether you were thoughtful and strategic about the career you chose or you stumbled into something. It is important to periodically revisit what you're doing and why, so that you're not looking up, decades into something and realizing you've spent time not in necessarily the best way that it could have been for yourself.
I agree.
Um,
And I think like so as I was listening to her listen, like she's in my house, as I was reading her though, and listening to you is what I probably meant to say. Where like if I had to write her mantra, it would be no unmet potential, no unrecognized talent. That she just wanted to always hit the mark the first time, and she wanted to
mm,
prove everybody wrong, and she also wanted to be very much acknowledged, not so much by her opponent, because we can get into Narcissa and Nadia later and fuck them for real, but
yes.
she wanted the broader community to say her name. Like,
Yeah.
I showed up and I embarrassed you. And I want you to say that out loud because that's what happened. But the other thing that I got out of it is like how number one, your why can change, right? Because both of
Yep.
them started playing sports before they really understood their why. And once you
That's
get to
right.
do it on the national or the international stage, and we just saw this with the tennis player that dropped out of the thing.
Naomi Osaka. Yep.
Yes,
Yep.
Naomi Osaka, who dropped out of the some kind of open.
The French
Because,
Open. The French
yes, the
Open.
French Open, because she refused to talk to press. And, you know, she started, somebody put a racket in her hand when she was probably 6 months old.
Yeah.
And but your why and who you are as a player and all of that changes. And it really, to me, low key, and this is probably inappropriate, and so I may cut it out the podcast. It low key made me think of like OG or really popular authors who get to the point in their writing that they have to be unapologetic about their why. Because when Kat talks about how the people shat on her for her whole career, and then
Yeah.
the moment she retired, oh, you meant so much to the game. You was the best
Yeah.
thing that ever happened. And how she was like, y'all are gaslighting me because this is not
Yeah.
how you treated me in the moment. And now that Kat is retired, she can say whatever she want to say because she don't care about endorsements and X, Y, and Z. But I think about people who reach the top of their game, or if not the top, become very popular, and how sometimes we can read them as being rude, or we can read them as not quote unquote caring about their fans, or thinking that they got there on their own, and all of the other things that we project, and we're gonna talk about projecting onto women in a minute. But how like you almost have to be unapologetic about your why. And I think for
Yeah.
both of them, that's what they were in search of. Now that they had reached a point where they had both had initial success, they had both had setbacks for one reason or another, and now that they were climbing that mountain again to get back in the game, it was very much like, why am I on this mountain?
Yes.
Like, because I could be
Yes.
in the bed. And so
Yes.
the why had to change in order to keep them going.
Yeah. No, no, I think that's well put, right? That to your point, that they both were involved and engaged and immersed in these sports before they even knew what that meant, right?
Hmm.
And it was inextricably tied to um, the favor that you get from your parent,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
In both instances, fathers, right? And there's a moment where Tegan, I think, is reflecting on the fact that whereas Ambrose's experience, his father always used negative reinforcement, right? She
Hmm.
reflected on her own experience, how her father was always positive, right? His
Yes.
way of coaching was encouragement, not critiquing,
Hmm.
and just recognizing that their fathers were both driving forces for them, but their manner of bringing out the quote unquote best in their kids were vastly different.
Yes. And didn't you
But
love how she, when Taj comes in and says, I'll be rooting for you, and how she talks
yes,
about, that phrase means something different depending on who says it. And I
Yes.
think it highlights exactly what you were just saying, where when my father said it, it meant one thing. When my mother said it, it meant another. When Van said it, it means something else. When Ambrose says it, it means something else. But when he says it, it's tainted.
Yeah.
And so she very much had a positive experience of people rooting for her and being behind her and supporting her and pushing her. And then here comes this motherfucker.
Yeah.
And I wrote in my notes, why is he ever present and when is he going to die?
Yeah.
That's what I wrote down. When is your last day so that I can drink
Yeah.
champagne and celebrate?
It
Because
was a God. I mean, he was like, uh, but that is reminiscent of, right, how we know that in many domestic abuse situations, right,
yeah,
that the abuser is, not just creating that omnipresent force in the woman's mind, let's just,
right.
man and woman, but
Right.
also doing things, right,
Yes.
popping up in
Yes.
places where they should not necessarily be, so that the woman does really begin to feel like he is everywhere,
Yes.
right? And
Yes.
because we were talking about celebrities with money and access and,
Mm-hmm.
all of those things, him being in those spaces, um, was very explainable,
Yeah.
but you
Yeah.
knew he was deliberately putting himself in the spaces where she was to continue terrorizing her.
Mm-hmm.
And it was effective, which is why I was glad that it was explained after everything, after the supermarket incident happened, right? That he had been outright stalking her. Because I was like,
Yes.
he done showed up at the supermarket. What is happening
Why
here?
are you always here?
Yeah. And then I was like,
Who
okay,
is
yes,
gonna
because he's
murder you?
right. It was like, okay, because he's stalking her. Got it. Okay.
Yes.
Because I thought that's what was going on, but and
No,
I
for
should have known, right?
real.
That obviously CCJ was going to lay it out when we were not sitting there like, so is he stalking her? Yes,
Right,
yes.
right.
The
He was
answer is
actively
yes.
stalking her. And it's like, why don't
Yes.
you find some business? Do you know of
Yes.
all the other things you could be doing with your time?
But
Like,
that's what they do, right?
it
That's what
is.
they
It very
do.
much
And
is. It very much is.
so it was that was there was an education in that situation as well, right? That conversation that she has with Ambrose about his mother.
Yep.
And she says, do not take away her agency.
Mm-hmm.
That was, I felt like I was sitting in class because
Mm.
I had to acknowledge to myself. So, first of all, I have never been in that situation, and no one close to me that I'm aware of has
Mm-hmm.
been in that situation. I'll put it like that. And so, very much outsider perspective on that. When I was younger, I will admit to viewing life in black and white and
Mm-hmm.
being in the more why don't you just leave camp, right? When I
Right.
knew nothing of the world,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because
Mm-hmm.
it's very easy, in my opinion, to be judgmental when you know nothing of the world. Then you see
Right.
some things and you learn some things and you realize that life is a lot more gray than black and
Mm-hmm.
white.
Mm-hmm.
But then her point was, don't go to the other extreme and infantilize your
Yes.
mother
Yes.
simply because you don't understand and don't agree with her decision. That was powerful, right? Because
Yes.
I think that is also a nuance that many of us on the outside looking in of that situation fall into,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? It's the, I'm so sorry this has happened to you and you've been abused. And then it goes to the extreme of, you poor thing, you can't think for yourself because he has
Right.
completely stripped you of your intelligence, your will, your self esteem. You have no mind of your own. And I
Yes.
did think it was powerful to hear Tegan say, don't go there,
Mm-hmm.
right? You don't have to take it there simply because you don't understand and you don't agree with her decision. Don't then take it to the next step and say, and clearly she no longer can make good decisions and she doesn't know what she's doing for herself and she doesn't know what's best for herself.
I agree. And I think the connective tissue for that, which kind of takes us over into Tegan's world, is we found out later that he didn't have all the information.
Correct.
So when his father comes over his house after he's been shot and gives that half-ass apology, and I was looking for somebody to push him down the stairs as well.
Indeed. Indeed.
know what? It's not enough violence. That's what I want to say. It's not enough. It's not enough vigilante justice and violence in these books. But that's okay. I can do the fan fiction in my head.
Yeah.
So, but the connective tissue is that for that is that we into Tegan's world is that we found out that Ambrose didn't have all the information, that he was seeing his mother very much as a victim, and Tegan helped him to understand that she's a survivor even if she stays.
Yes.
You're not
Yes.
only a survivor if you leave, you're a survivor if you stay. And people
Yeah.
have any number of reasons to stay in
Yeah.
situations like that. And no, they're not the reasons that they would actively choose, but it is what it is. And I think moving away from this pie in the sky view of the world and like where was she supposed to live, work? Like, come on now. How was she
Yeah.
supposed to continue to pay for him to be doing all of this very expensive at his level football? Like y'all lunching, you know what I mean? You know what I mean? Like he was kind of not seeing it, like basically what Tegan says to him. But when we look at Tegan's situation, not just the abuse that she experienced with Taj, but also how she was publicly shamed without people having all the information.
Yes.
And looking at her and casting her in one, so like just as Ambrose had cast his mother in this victim light and had infantilized her, she don't have her own mind, she's not making her own choices, if I could just lift her up and save her and throw her in a castle, you know, like Rapunzel almost is what he the direction he was going. She was cast in a light that she was hard to work with and difficult, she a hoe, she's troubled, she's, you know, all of these things. And the other piece that kind of links up to this that we can get into is when she talks about how wrong everybody is about her, from twerking to the nature of her relationship with Taj. Y'all
Yeah.
always wrong about me.
Yeah.
You look at me and him and you put in hashtag goals and he's beating my ass.
Yeah.
You looking at me
Yeah.
twerking and now I'm a slut and I'm a hoe and I'm this and I'm that when I ain't been with nobody since him.
Right.
You know, if you call having sex outside of marriage or outside of a relationship a hoe, which I don't, but you know what I mean? Like she was just miscast on so many levels, which is why I think she was able to really pick that out for Ambrose and help him see it differently.
Yeah, and listen, as a woman, as a black woman, right? Tegan, we've seen Tegan's situation, albeit not
Mm-hmm.
exactly identical, but so many black women, right? Celebrities and even non-celebrities, because social media now anyone can put you up on the internet,
That's
right?
right.
And anyone and everyone can hop on a podcast and pontificate
Mm-hmm.
and offer their opinions, right? And whereas before the advent of social media, people were still doing this, but they were doing this in their own little communities, right? They were doing this
Right.
amongst their friends. They didn't have the platform to get on, Blue Ivy's internet and put
Mm-hmm.
it on there and it go
For
viral,
public consumption, yeah.
exactly, for public consumption, with people saying some really vicious and nasty things. And, I thought Cole's conversation with Tegan about just having to make the choice, right? Like, it is what it is, right? This is understanding what's going to change and
Yeah.
what's not going to change, right?
Yeah.
And what was never going to change is that no matter what she did, people were going to have something negative to say. And Cole's point was well taken, that look, that's not going to change.
Mm-hmm.
What has to change is the way you choose to deal with it, right? And so
Right.
rather than tuning into and feeding into the negativity, which is always going to be there, tune into the positive. Because, Cole
Right.
was like, look, just as there are people always having something negative to say, there are people always cheering you on, always
Yes.
bigging you up,
Yes.
right?
Yes. Yes.
Always
Yes.
seeing the best in you and always wanting the best for you. But if you choose to focus on the negative, that is going to suck you in,
Yes.
right? It is not going to edify you. It is only going to tear you down. You're only going to stay in this vicious cycle while you ignore the people that actually do see you.
Mm-hmm.
right? And do want the best for you. And that's life, right? That
Absolutely.
also is life.
Yep.
And I think she needed to hear that from someone, because she was just getting dragged down into the
Yeah.
swirl.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and yes, she was doing her best to kind of stay above it, but it's like it felt like every time she turned around, there was
Yeah.
a new issue, right? There was a new issue. Speaking of the way the relationship looked like from the outside looking in, right? One of the side things that I loved was the relationship with Arizona, right? And the fact that Arizona, that she and Arizona connected after the Taj breakup, on
Yes.
this, I know how he is and I know what
Yep.
he did to you because he did the same thing to me. And not only did a friendship form out of that, but also Arizona connecting her to therapy through Noah, right?
Mm-hmm.
And saying, here is a friend who can help you work your way through it. I thought that was a nice little, like, oh, I like how CCJ did that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, because when you think about like the Me Too movement with women, he did it to me, he did it to
Yep.
me, he did it to
Mm-hmm.
me, and this was a little, kind of like almost nod to that, but it was done privately, right? And out of
Right.
that blossomed this beautiful friendship, with someone that she knew, understood exactly how she felt, because they had dealt not just with the same situation, but the exact same person.
Mm-hmm.
So I did like that.
I did as well. And I think the other thing that came out as it relates to how easy it was for her to get dragged down is because with every match, it started all over again.
Yeah, yeah.
So, and I think if with her, it's with him, it's every game. With her, it's every match. If you're a writer, it's with every book. If you're a performer, it's with every song. If you on TV, it's
Mm,
with every show. Every time I put myself out there, I got to do this with y'all all over again.
yeah,
Like, and that can be wearing. It is wearing. It can be. It is wearing, especially with social media because familiarity breeds contempt.
yeah,
And
yeah,
so now that I feel like I have access to you because I can tweet you any time of day or night and I can DM you unless you close your DMs and I can email you. I have all of these different ways to be able to get to you to tell you how much I don't like you.
yeah,
Like, or how poorly you performed or how, and so which is why I thought it was an important point where she talked about going on social media hiatus
yeah,
before games or after games or at certain intervals to just kind of protect her mental health because people are nuts, okay?
yeah,
Like,
yeah.
and not in a way that like they should be hospitalized, but in a way that I don't think people see how they treat people. They know how they don't want to feel, but I don't think they often think about how they make other people feel.
You know what's interesting? I was watching this morning. Bill Clinton has a new book out with James Patterson, right? A fiction
Okay.
book, a thriller.
Hmm.
And he said something. He said, "I think our democracy is at its greatest peril because people have stopped behaving like people towards people."
Mm.
He said something along those lines. The people have stopped
Hmm.
behaving like people to people.
Hmm.
Um, and bringing it back to this, because something that we also see that's happening in real life is the escalation of disrespect and
Yes.
outright violence towards athletes, right?
Yes.
You've got, now that it's like fans have been let back into the arenas, and they have taken complete leave of their senses. They're
Hmm.
throwing, there was an incident with Russell Westbrook like 2 or 3 weeks ago because Washington's out of the playoffs. I'm sorry, you already know that.
I know, Shay.
But a fan throwing popcorn at him. There was
Hmm.
an incident in Madison Square Garden, a fan spitting on Trey Young.
Yep.
And I'm just like, these people would never in their life do that out on the street
That's right.
if they had encountered this individual out on the street.
Hmm.
Now, again, Tegan is a woman, smaller stature, but still, right? There has been this escalation. And I think the reason I mentioned Bill Clinton's quote is it's almost like with athletes and with celebrities, I think also in general, there's always been this, they're not like us, right?
Yes.
but it's almost like people are forgetting they're human,
Yes,
right?
yes,
You're
yes.
just there for my entertainment. So
Right,
it doesn't matter what I say to or about you. It doesn't matter how I behave to or about you, because you're not even human. You're
right,
just LeBron James, right?
right,
You're just
right. You're a
Tegan.
product.
You're
You're a
just whoever.
commodity. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. And I think we definitely we were seeing that happen with her, because you're right. Before every match, it would start up again,
Mm-hmm.
and people just saying whatever they want to say because, hey, put it on social media and it is what it is.
Right. And the contradiction of it all. Like, Christina C. Jones did a live and I had to run out of it because I thought she was gonna say a spoiler. But for the little bit I did hear was that she was talking about, like, especially on the internet, how easy it is to mind your business
Yes,
and how
yes,
easy it is to scroll past something that you don't
yes,
like, but instead you engage with it. And she was talking about, she mentioned Lori Harvey, and I think she mentioned somebody else. And specifically as it relates to women, this is irritating to me, especially on Twitter, because I spend a lot of time scrolling Twitter for politics and for Black people shenanigans. And the number of dum dums on Twitter, like the Kevin Samuels acolytes and
hmm,
people who they want their woman to be a freak with a lady in the street and a freak in the bedroom. She got to have a
yes,
PhD. She got to make $250,000 a year. She can't have no kids. She got to want kids, but she got to, like, be good to her family, but not spend too much time with her family. She got to know how to twerk, but only twerk for me. I mean, it's
yeah,
like all of these requirements that you're putting on this other person as if their sole purpose in life is to
serve
satisfy
you.
your every whim and inclination.
Yeah,
Boy, fuck
yeah,
you. like I'm
indeed.
not I'm not your mule. I don't belong
Yeah,
to you. I'm not an object for your affection. I'm a whole separate independent human being. And for the women who shame other women, it's weird to me because it's like you suck dick too. Like what are you talking about?
yeah.
like
And
and so
remember Tegan making the point that, when the situation happened with Taj, how some of her harshest and most vicious critics were other
yes.
women
Yes.
defending him and saying, you
Yes.
clearly did something. It's clearly your fault. You provoked
Right.
him, so on and so forth. Yeah.
And just how crazy that is. And if more people would just take a minute, just pause before you hit post. You know what I'm saying? And because I don't think people realize like how much of a different persona they become when they being a keyboard cowboy.
Yes.
Because a
Yes.
whole lot of this stuff, like you said, you would never say to my face. But
The
because you
internet
behind
thug.
your screen and you on the keyboard, you're doing the most. Come see
Yeah.
me. Like that's what I want.
You're
I just
you're an internet thug, right? Internet
exactly.
thugging. And
Exactly.
it's so true of, the things that people will say behind the keyboard that they would
Mm-hmm.
never say. And how about you can just leave quietly, right?
Honey,
You can just
honey,
leave
this is not an
quietly.
airport. You do not have to
It,
announce your exit. Roll
yeah,
on.
if it's not for you, Love had shared in the love encroachment discussion last night that, some of the reviews people made a point of saying, I'm no longer supporting you. And I was just kind of like,
Mm,
I don't know that you needed to announce that. You could
you did
just
not.
not buy any more books, right? There
Mm-hmm.
is you can give constructive feedback. You can articulate things, that you don't like or that you disagree with without being outright nasty,
Yeah.
vicious,
Yeah.
and I do think that there's just been a loss of that, right? There's just been a loss of how to communicate like an individual that's been raised with some sense.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Very true.
So yeah, the social media piece was, and that's not going anywhere, unfortunately,
No,
right?
no,
That's
it's
just
not.
not going anywhere. um that's just here to stay. But you think of someone, and not that this was Naomi's issue, but the fact that she was just like, I'm just taking a step back and I have the power, the money, and the
Yep.
wherewithal to do that. And that's what I'm going to do because my peace of mind is more important. And what was interesting, just quickly, as an aside to that, because of course people have been debating that decision, right? Applauding it, critiquing
Mm-hmm.
it. and I saw something on LinkedIn where someone was like, well, that's her job. And there
Mm.
was someone who immediately countered that and said, no, no, no. Her job is playing tennis.
Right.
And she's damn good at that job, right?
Mm-hmm.
If she weren't good at her actual job, the media wouldn't want to talk to her. Now,
Mm-hmm.
media has become part of the environment, but
Right.
let's distinguish that her actual job, what she actually gets paid for, is being a beast on the tennis court.
Right.
And she
Right.
does that incredibly well,
Right.
so well that she has decided, and she has the financial flexibility to say, I'm going to step away from this tournament
Mm-hmm.
because taking care of myself is more important than going for, this multi-million dollar prize in this particular tournament. I'm going to take the step back. It's going to be very interesting to see how that ultimately plays out, because the genie's out of the bottle, right? The
Yes.
pandemic has changed so many things,
Yes.
and that genie is out of the bottle. And the thought that you can just go back to telling athletes, just shut up and take it, just shut up and dribble, just shut up.
Mm-hmm.
That train has left the station.
And it ain't never coming
Um,
back.
no, it's not. It's not. It's not. But no, I was just gonna say. I mean, it just brings us back to the issues that were going on in this book in the midst of this adorable enemies to lovers slow burn story.
Right. That's the area that I thought we was going to disagree when I said we was going to disagree. I don't think it's enemies to lovers. I think it's misunderstanding to friends to lovers.
Oh, I agree. Yeah. I
Okay.
mean, I'm using enemies to lovers
Just
because,
because they
right, that's
started, it was tough. Yeah.
exactly that's the trope, right? That's the trope. But I agree with you because it was a misunderstanding. But
Mm-hmm.
let's be clear: when she fired off those
She lit
those
him up.
torpedo tweets, he was
Mm-hmm.
her enemy,
She
right?
lit him up.
And when he saw those tweets, he was no longer interested in apologizing. He may not have viewed her as an enemy, but he certainly was not. He
Yeah.
didn't care about her being misunderstood. He just felt like he was misunderstood. What I appreciated was that misunderstanding did not drag out, right? They got clarity on what had happened,
Mm-hmm.
and she was still kind of like, okay, that's fine, right?
Yeah.
So
She
maybe I
held the
don't want to
grudge
stab
much more
you,
than he
but
did.
yeah, well, there was no reason for him to hold a grudge
Yeah. He
because
was
she
wrong.
exactly he got what was coming to him because he put himself in a situation to have his words and even things he didn't say, right, attributed to him. But hey.
Mm-hmm. Have we done love yet? What did you love? I think we're doing themes, but I don't know if we gotten into
Well,
like.
so loved overall book. There were a couple of things that thoroughly entertained me, so I'll put
Mm-hmm.
that in love, or that made my heart warm.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, the chess game,
Yeah,
I loved
girl.
seeing that play out. Right, I thought that was
Oh,
adorable, especially since they didn't know it was the other
yes.
making the moves.
I loved it.
Um, I had mentioned, right, really like the genesis of the Arizona relationship, that
Mm-hmm.
something sounded like something beautiful came out of what is just a horrible, awful situation.
Mm-hmm.
I loved the Ramsey Ambrose conversation because I loved Ramsey
Mm.
paying it forward, right? The same
Yes.
way that Trent did for him. Now he was
Mm-hmm.
paying it forward. Um, and my all time, I mean, my favorite scene of the whole book is the Thanksgiving dinner scene with
Yes.
Cheyenne, right? Miss Vonda,
Miss
I think the right
Rhonda.
term is shanked, right? And Cheyenne's boo. And I was just like, okay, Elvis, come through. Like,
I'm here
okay,
for it. I supported the
like for
whole thing.
Cheyenne, yeah, for Cheyenne, we knew we were seeing already throughout the book that Cheyenne still very much had ties, right, to the old neighborhood and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
But when Miss Vonda was like, dear, I think the correct term is he was shanked. And I was like, okay, Miss Vonda. And then to hear that they were, caucusing and colluding about how to get his head busted in while he was out in the
Mm-hmm.
street, I was just like, I'm loving this because, we weren't getting, based on what we had seen of Miss Vonda from to that point, right? I might have thought she might have just been like, give it to Jesus, let's pray on
Right.
it, and leave it over to the Lord. Miss Vonda was like, no,
Right.
no, no, I want him to catch these hands. I want
For
him to
sure.
catch these hands with a bat in it. And for Cheyenne's boo to be like, baby, I knew you were disappointed because we didn't catch him before he got picked up and put in custody, so I had to handle that. And I was like, okay, Cheyenne, boo, okay, yes,
I
sir,
loved it.
yes.
I loved it. I loved it. And I think some more information came out at that moment too, because as we were talking about at the beginning about Ambrose not having Tegan really schooling him on how to support a person that has experienced or is experiencing domestic violence,
Yeah.
and it coming out later that she said, "Should I be locking the door on him? I don't even be thinking about him." Great.
Yes.
She said,
Yes.
he called the
Yes.
police on me, and the police told him die. That's what they said. The police said,
Yes. Stop
the
getting on her
police said, "Stop playing
nerves.
on my phone."
I was like, yes, yes, yes.
So she, even though her theology stressed me out, and that's a conversation for another day, because that's one thing I would not
Agree.
broach.
I agree 1,000% on that. I was like, Ms. Vonda, I can't co-sign,
I
girl.
can't co-sign. I cannot.
I can't get with you on that, Ms. Vonda.
Yeah, her.
Um,
Ooh. It took me back to systematic theology class. I was like, girl, no, 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 no.
it
Like,
just, it just reminded me of, you know, sometimes it is God, and sometimes, more often than not, I think it's simply boils down to the decisions that we make, right?
mm,
And being able to just own that, right?
yeah,
The
yeah.
decisions that we make rather than attributing it to God, right?
I agree with that.
So
I agree with that. I agree with that.
yeah, yeah.
And
To that though, let me just say one more thing, because
yeah.
when he revisits that after the shooting
Hmm.
and begins up thinking about his own situation, and he's like, well, maybe this was God's way of saying you didn't get the message the first time, so now I'm going to be explicit. um I had a reaction to that too, but I
Mm,
what did resonate for me is I do believe that there are instances, and the phrase that CCJ used, or she had them use, was necessary shift. And I
yeah.
do believe that there are instances where a situation that you've been holding on to well past the expiration date,
Hmm.
and it begins to deteriorate right in your hands. It begins to
Hmm.
disintegrate, right? So that it's like, okay, well, if you're not going to let it go, we're going to let this turn to dust in your hands so that there's nothing to hold on to. And I have had that happen, a personal situation and a professional situation, where I believe God was at work, right? Where it was like,
Hmm.
you passed the expiration date, and now, um not so much that God made that happen, but I almost felt like he was like, but this is the natural consequence of when you hold on to something past the expiration date.
Hmm.
It spoils, it
Hmm.
disintegrates, it falls
Hmm.
apart because you're
Hmm.
past the expiration date. So I guess what I would say is, it wasn't, and I don't believe that it was God specifically causing it, right, to deteriorate. It was,
Yeah.
this was what was always going to happen. This is why I was telling you to let it go. You
Hmm.
refuse to let go. And so now you are experiencing the natural outcome that was always going to happen, which is why I wanted you to step away.
Right. I
That
am.
was it, and I'm not saying that that's what happened with him. I'm saying
Right.
that's where my mind went, because I didn't necessarily agree with him on, him saying, and look, he was like, look, I feel like this now, I may not feel like this later. I
Right.
also thought, I was like, okay, bro, let's not, like, you had a
Just
psychopath come and shoot you in the leg.
lean
Let's
back.
not bring
Lean
Jesus
back.
into this, right?
Yeah.
Let's
Lean
not bring
back.
Jesus into this. But that's why I'm saying it did kind of just take my mind in a slightly different direction. And again, that's not so much God causing something to happen, but almost like just, reminding you, this is why I wanted you to let go, right? Because
Yeah.
you were past the expiration date. And stuff, when it's past an expiration date, it's no good anymore, right? It's
Right.
no good anymore, you
Mhm.
know.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, yeah, when she handled it the way that she handled it, and again, that was the choice that she made. And and look, he questioned her, right? Because he said,
Yeah.
well, you said your bargain with God was, that we would be kept safe. And he's like, technically, mama, then under your own terms, the bargain has fallen through, because I've
Right.
now been, shot in the
Right.
leg, and
Right.
it's going to be a wait and see about whether I get to play again. And she didn't really have a good response to that, did she?
No, she
Um,
didn't.
in the hospital room. So, he said what he said and she said what she said. And yeah,
Yeah, I almost wanted to add to the page on that one because I think we have all, especially if you grow up in church, maybe not all, but many of us have had moments where we would throw it in our parents' faces. And I think it is a part of like Fowler's stages of faith a little bit, how you feel about what you believe in. And if you was raised in church, you didn't really have a choice about what you believed. And so sometimes you get to a point where you do kind of buck the system a little bit. And if I was to add to the page doesn't give me this, but I've done it with my grandmother and my mother. And I'm wondering if she was quiet on purpose. If it was almost like a keep on living here, like
yeah,
what I'm saying, that she didn't necessarily have to answer for her own faith and theology, especially at a moment where, her baby boy, who she didn't get
yes,
to see all the time. And, when she got
yes,
to see Atlas, she about fell out and, want to take a
yes,
picture of her boys together. That boy, you almost went out of here. I'm not arguing about you with this. Let me tell you
right,
what you do. You know what I mean?
right.
And so I feel like there was a little bit of like, I'm adding to it some wise mothering in that moment, that we are not about to get into no theological conversation,
Correct,
sir.
correct.
Take this medicine. Why don't you press that button and go to sleep before I slap you?
Yeah,
You know what
I
I
think that's
mean?
right. I think that's right. I think that's right. Can we talk about the Ava situation?
Okay,
Um,
please go. Yes, because yes.
so it was one of the surprises for me. A
Yeah, me too.
surprise in a sense of how it played out. It was a pleasant surprise, candidly,
Hmm.
because I thought I knew exactly where it was going, and I was like, okay, we see where this is going.
Girl, I would have showed
But
up at her house.
well, yeah, but I liked that CCJ gave us the awkward and the ambiguous on that situation, at least from T's perspective, right? Because Tegan
Yeah,
was kind of like, I don't know what's going on here, but I liked that it wasn't the blatant they exchanged words or a slick comment was made. It was this awkward moment, right? Where Ava
yeah.
actually didn't say anything. She didn't do anything
Hmm.
blatant. But Tegan was like, I saw in her facial expression the exact moment when it occurred to her
Yes,
that you and I might be an item, and that's why I'm here. Right.
yes,
But it didn't go all the way to the slick. And that's okay, because I like the slick too. But I appreciated CCJ giving us the, ooh, this is about to get messy, ooh, 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 ooh,
yes,
without
yes.
it being in your face. It was messy because someone was being messy. Right.
So
I
this
like
is,
that a lot.
yeah, this is what I thought was coming, and I'm so glad that that train did not arrive. I thought that they were going to break up to make up. I and
Mm,
this was up until about halfway through that I was like, because it's a very slow burn, but I felt like it should have been, because it was such a wide story. And
yeah.
so Christina C. Jones will very easily, and in her sleep, she will write you a couple. Each of them has a sibling. Each of them has two friends. 80% of the time, we are watching this couple fall in love. 20% of the time, they go to the grocery store and laugh with their friends. And when they're with their friends, they're talking about the person that they're interested in.
Mm-hmm.
And so she can write that kind of one-to-one romance that gives you the hard eyes and everything and whatever. This to me it was not a one-to-one romance where 80% of the time I'm thinking about the other person. These people had lives. Like she
Yes.
really wrote around characters
Mm-hmm.
where they were lit. It wasn't a prescriptive romance.
Right.
They Even though you get them meet cute and you get them getting to know each other, you get them eventually having sex. That was the B plot for me. Like the A plot was their friendship. They just happen to end up
Yeah.
having sex and Godspeed. You know what I'm saying? But
Yeah.
like
Yeah. I agree.
The A plot for me was them, for lack of a better phrase, like working out their soul salvation. Like
Yes.
she was trying to figure out what her life was going to be. He was trying to figure out what his life was going to be. They happened to bump into each other on the internet. It doesn't go well. And Cole and Jordan, I was so happy to see them happy and her stealing moments away
Yes.
with her babies. That really made me glad.
Yes.
Cole and Jordan are really the engine that pushes them together. They probably would not have ended up together were it not for Cole and Jordan.
True.
And it was just, it wasn't a destined to be together or meant for you. It was real. It was just, I was swept up in the realness of it more than I was swept up in the romance of it, if that makes sense.
I see that. Yeah. We were given two almost fully formed people, right?
Yes,
So, and
yes,
as a result, when that is the case, they got their own stuff going on, and
yes,
they both were in the midst of, like we had talked about earlier, rediscovery, right? And
yes,
figuring out, why am I climbing this mountain again? And I think, to your point, I appreciate that she gave that the time and care and attention that it
absolutely,
deserved, instead
absolutely.
of making that the side plot to them falling in love, right?
Right, right.
um that was happening while their attraction was building, and each of them were reflecting on the, what's happening here,
Yeah,
what's happening,
yes,
what am I feeling
yes,
about him, what am I why am I beginning to think about her in that way, right? In the context of still navigating what was happening in their lives as
yes,
Ambrose and Tegan. So I agree with you in terms of, when you characterize it as why. Yes, that's a great way to put it. And yet I didn't feel like the romance was sacrificed.
mm-mm.
I don't know that I would even call, I like your phrasing was B plot. I thought it was very much in harmony with what was happening, and I didn't
Yes,
feel like the romance was getting short shrift. I think it was done in such a way that I was perfectly satisfied with the slow burn of it
mm-hmm.
all, as opposed to, like, so when is it going to happen, because
Exactly.
we were getting this window into what was going on with them as people, and very much invested in them getting themselves together as people, right?
Yeah, yeah.
That wasn't boring or dull, or was like, okay, fine, fine, fine. Can you just get to the romance, right? When are
Right.
y'all
Can
gonna have
y'all stop
sex?
fucking? Which
Yeah,
is,
exactly, exactly,
but
exactly.
which is why coming away from me because even once they do get together, at the end, it's not happy. It's they're gonna be happy together, but they still got stuff going on. Even at
Yeah,
the end, she's worried about the fact that he hasn't seen her out of her element. He hasn't been with her when she wasn't traveling all the time and on the court all the time conditioning. And so she talked about like he don't really know the me that's not you know what I'm saying on the
yeah,
move. And so and
but
then she
yeah.
go
Go ahead.
ahead.
I'm sorry.
No, no, no,
I
go
was gonna
ahead.
say, but he nipped that in the bud, right?
Yeah, he
Once
did.
she put that to him, he made it clear to her that concern was in her head. That was
Yes.
not what was actually going on. So I appreciated him being like, yeah, no, no, I went all the way back into your history. Like, I went all the way
Yeah,
and
he
looked at
very
the
much
acrylic
gave her, girl, I think
nails.
about you. Can you come sit down? You know what I mean?
Exactly, exactly. So because I do think that by the end, you know, certainly when we're finding out, the pregnancy and all of
Mm-hmm.
that, they do. I think that's, those things have been laid to rest, right? What is still, I think, ever present is our next chapter, right?
Right.
As Tegan, the tennis player, as Ambrose,
The football
the
player,
football
yeah.
player. But we're going to continue doing
We'll
this
figure it out
together.
together, yeah.
Yeah.
And what I was gonna say is that it very much for me was a book about individuals that happened to come together, but they
Yes.
remained individuals. They
Yes.
they kind of they passed the Bechdel test. You know what I mean? Like a movie will pass the test if the women in the movie talk about something other than the man when they're together. And so it's this
Mm,
idea that women in movies and in TV only exist to further the plot of the man. And
interesting.
to me, they were, like you said, they were fully formed. Her life was not wrapped up in what he was going to do and vice versa. You know, they
Right.
became friends. I love the fact that he made the first, so I'll go into my love. I love the fact that he made the first move on the chessboard, and he also made the first move in speaking up for her with Taj and kind of walking up on that and seeing what that was. And so that was
Mm-hmm.
mirrored. I loved their transition to love. I think they're outside of the hotel room and they're like, gosh, it feels like we should, like, I don't know, shake hands or hug, or she says
Yes.
kiss. And they
Yes.
take a second to think about it, and then here comes somebody else coming up the goddamn hallway.
Yes.
So they couldn't do it. I loved that when he listen, that boy showed up in the People's Republic. Do you understand what I'm telling you?
Yes.
He
Yes.
showed up
Yes.
in the People's Republic of China. I said, that boy's serious.
Yes. Yes.
So I thought that was really sweet. And this was a moment. Now you know, we've been serious, or not necessarily serious, but like talking about themes and stuff up to this point. This what I'm getting ready to say was a really serious moment for me, and it almost made me put the book down. She is with Vanity, getting dressed. They getting ready to go to dinner. Okay. I think he showed up. I don't think this was when he was in China, but this is when he showed up somewhere else, somewhere in New York, because he wasn't far from Connecticut. So they get ready to go to dinner, and Vanity or Van is telling her what to wear, and Van is giving her a hard time about her feelings for him. Why he here? You know, why don't you dress like you somebody? You know, look cute, whatever, whatever. And then they
Mm-hmm.
have the dinner. Tegan goes into the bathroom, and Vanity don't want to leave Terrell. Terrell needs to be stabbed.
Yes.
And then and then Cole comes into the bathroom, and you know, this whole conversation where they're giving her a hard time, and Vanity says, who are you trying to convince? And Tegan says, myself, bitch. And then Cole is like, well, I don't know why you trying to convince yourself, because I seen y'all together, I seen him, I seen you. And then this is what I support: black women. Can I have my lie? Let me
Well,
tell myself a lie. Why do you always want to hold me accountable and make me tell myself the truth? I always put the book down. Let this girl lie to herself about that man.
no. Friends don't let friends lie to themselves. Not over some
Let
fine piece of chocolate.
but
No. No. No.
I was like, please let her have her lie. And of course, I'm joking. I didn't put the book down. But as a person who, when my friends tell me the truth, I'd be like, that's very rude of you to just be honest with me like that. Like, can you let me live in my delusion? Don't do that to me. Because you could see her struggling, not a real struggle, but very much trying to figure out, like, what is this exactly? Because it wasn't the
Yeah.
traditional, you know, across a crowded room, whatever. And when he comes to her, it is always in a supportive, and she says, like, are you a therapist? You know what I mean?
Right.
He didn't step to her like, I'm trying to smash, you got a fat ass,
Right.
or he didn't step to her like, you know, even on the you're cute, can I take you out? It was none of that. It was like, your ex is being an asshole. I'm gonna break that up. I see that you're about to break down. Let's go out on the balcony. You don't talk to me, I won't talk to you, so you can have your moment. And another thing that I wrote down, which I appreciated, I didn't love it because I wanted them to be together, but I appreciated how much or how often they move away from each other in the first half of the book. There was so many near misses of,
Mm.
like, this could be the time that we have the conversation, or this could be the time that we kiss, or this could be the time, and it's either him or her that just kind of shrugs it off, shakes it off, and goes their separate ways. And I felt like that was so real,
Yeah.
because it is rare in real life that the first time the man say something to you, you kiss, and then you instantly know that he gone. You know what I mean?
Right.
So
Right.
it was
Right.
just, it was so. This was a very, 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 to me, realistic story on a lot of levels. On a lot of levels.
I agree. I
Um,
think that's why I say I think, for all of the why I pick, put out some of the themes, because for all of the fiction of it,
mhm,
right, these were two very relatable characters who just happened to be their circumstances, right, are
mhm.
the fantastical fictional football player, tennis player.
Yes.
Um, but that and podcasts blown out of proportion and mess,
Mhm.
backfiring and all of that stuff, but the coming together and what happens also when you have two people that are more whole than not, right? They weren't
Yes.
perfect. They both still had their baggage. So when we say whole, we're not saying they had completely worked through all their issues. They clearly hadn't, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they had their aspirations, their goals, their insecurities, all of which were present front and center. They were working through them, and I think working through them in more healthier ways than not, right?
Mm.
In terms of being self-aware and reflecting on it and having conversations with people that were giving them good perspective, as opposed to engaging in destructive behavior because they didn't know and they didn't understand and they couldn't deal and they couldn't cope.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There's that too.
Yeah.
um so yeah. And I think just kind of even going back to the Ava situation and how that
Yeah, I thought she
ultimately
was gonna
played
walk
out.
in on them. That's what I thought. I thought
I
I
Yeah.
thought she was gonna walk in on them and be and misunderstand it, and that they were gonna break up to make up. And because it took them so long to get together, had they broken up and made up, I wouldn't have been no good. I wouldn't have been no good because I wanted them together. Not in I didn't pine for them to be together the way that I did for like Nubia and Steph. Once they had their breakdown because he didn't handle her cancer diagnosis well,
Yeah.
or
Hmm.
other couples where, oh, what's the lady? She's French. She's a chocolatier and she's
Vivian.
French.
Is it Vivian?
Vivian,
Vivian
and
and Carter.
that guy, the way that they break
Yeah.
up to make up,
Yeah.
because it was so there, I was pining for them to be together. The breakup just did me wrong. But in this instance, had these people broke up, I would have been like, you know what, and I'm okay because I'm not going to finish it.
Yeah, and that's what I mean. Like, that's why I think I liked how the Ava situation
Yes,
played out, because it didn't go. I knew ultimately
yes,
it would be fine, but she took us in a slightly different direction to get to fine. And even
yeah.
with Ava, her coming to the house and Ava's there babysitting while he's asleep, right? And
Mm-hmm.
Ava immediately saying, "This is not what it looks like. Let me break down for you exactly what happened."
Yeah, you
Boom, boom,
should.
boom, boom, boom. And but it's I think that was both Ava. It was more believable to me because of Tegan's celebrity, right? Because I think
Yeah.
had Tegan just been a regular woman, I'd have been like, okay, Ava seems like she's doing a little bit too much, right? But
Yeah.
we knew that Ava was a fan, right? Because she was
Right.
super duper excited to speak to Tegan before she peeped. Oh, she
Yes.
might be over here because there's something going on between
For
them, right?
something
And so
else.
when she was practically, tripping over herself to explain it's not what it looks like, it's not like that, and Tika's like, so what is it? Kind of break it down for me. Like, I thought that actually, I liked how that played out as well, because I'm like, well, Ava was a fan of Tegan's, right?
Mm-hmm.
She was legitimately a fan of hers, and it's like, I don't want beef. There's no reason for there to be beef, and candidly, we could be friends. And it's funny because one of the women who runs exclusively Emmanuel's, Anicia Miller, was like, but could you be Ava's friend though? Right? She posed that question,
Could
and there
not.
were a number of people chiming in. And I think the consensus was, more of us than not were like, yeah, I don't think, like, we could be cordial, right? But I don't think we could be friends. Like, this notion of being friends with someone that has had carnal knowledge of your man is
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
like
Yeah. Yeah.
icky.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Tegan said it best, right? It wasn't about logic. It wasn't about right or wrong. It was about emotions, right? And
Yeah.
that's exactly right. That's exactly right. So I liked how CCJ gave us the awkward and the icky,
Mm-hmm.
um, without it being like blatantly messy, right?
Yeah.
How it was ultimately, and that was in large part because I think Ambrose handled it the right way from the door,
He
right?
did.
He
He
did not
did.
he did not
He
allow
told.
it.
Yeah.
He didn't allow it to slip into foolishness. And then Ava was also, she was honest with herself, and
Mm-hmm.
then with Ambrose and with Tegan about,
Yeah.
like, at the end of the day, it was fear of missing out, and I don't want to lose the friendship, and I accept that what's done is done, and I also acknowledge that I didn't want him in that way, right?
Yeah.
um so yeah.
Yeah, I thought so too. I was glad that it was wrapped up
Yeah.
quickly, and that my nerves did not have to be bad, and that she didn't end up on the needs to be stabbed list.
Yes.
And it almost reminded me of Jesus, Nate and Sloane,
Hmm.
the woman that Sloane is pushing him to be with.
Yes.
And then once
Yes.
she finds out, oh wait, you with Sloan? Oh child, let me bow all the way out. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
it's no competition. It wasn't quite in that direction, but it was still Ava saw no reason. She was confident enough in her own right. She was honest enough with herself to see no reason to be ridiculous.
Right. Right.
There was no
Right.
reason. If I want a football player, trust me, I can get me one. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? Like
Yeah.
there was no reason for her to try to break them up or, be doing anything that could make life hard for her friend. He was
Right.
actually her friend, even though they had a sexual component to their relationship. And she respected the friendship enough not to turn into somebody else. And so it's a long way of me saying it was good to see that they were actually friends and that she wasn't someone conniving on him that at the first opportunity wanted to ruin his life because that's not a friend.
Yep. Yep.
So yeah, that she Ava stressed me out, but I appreciated how her situation rounded out. Another thing that I loved was that it was Richardson Sports Management and not Johnson Sports Management.
See it. Yeah. Yeah. I assumed, and
It's because of
yeah,
Nate.
yeah, I assumed that it right because in
Pass interference.
pass interference, right, we know that Nate was ready to pull the trigger to go out
Mm-hmm.
on his own. And Cole was like, when you're ready, yeah, I'm going with
Yeah,
you. So
yeah,
I was surprised at the fact that Jordan was part of it because I was like, oh,
yes.
okay,
But part of it, and I mean, he doesn't come off in any of the books as anybody that has to force his way to the front.
right,
And what I respected is that, is Nate and it belongs to Nate and Cole. He worked there, you know what I mean?
yeah,
But it was their thing. It's Richardson Sports Management, and he's an agent and he's there. But I just respected him respecting them
yep, yep,
and not having to make it be about him.
yep,
So I thought that was cute, and all of their Jordan and Cole's back and forth was beautiful. And to Megan, I've said in the beginning that I spoke to somebody on Twitter. Her name is Megan, and what I end up confessing to her, and I will confess it on the podcast because I know most people are on Facebook, and I spend most of my time on Twitter, is that once I like a character or once I attack or latch onto a character, they can do no wrong.
mm-hmm,
I want you to be
mm-hmm,
quiet, Attorney General. Once,
mm-hmm.
once I latch onto a character, they can do no wrong. And so I immediately latched onto Cole. She became my proxy into the world. And so, as far as I was concerned, she could do no wrong, and everything that she thought and imagined in her life was right. I also told Megan on Twitter that Attorney General here, AG, is much more neutral in her reading. And so she can
Mm-hmm.
go back and forth and see both sides. And that's what makes her wrong. You understand what I'm saying?
The slander continues.
You need to pick a side. Do you understand? Do you remember the song? Whose side are you leaning on? Leaning on the Lord's side. Do you remember that song? I lean, I lean, I lean.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Why haven't you picked a side? That's really what I want to know.
I picked the side of right, is what I picked. And
Okay.
Megan vindicated my
Lord have
side.
mercy.
Thank you,
She
Megan.
did.
Shout out, girl. Thank you, Megan.
It's just because y'all both attorneys. That's why y'all agree. That's the
That's right.
only
Megan know the truth.
reason.
Megan know the truth. Do we want to get into I guess some of the ancillary questions? Least favorite character, who you want to
Yeah,
get your own book.
my stab list is long. His father
Yeah,
needed to
mine
be
too.
stabbed. JR
Yep.
needed to be stabbed. Taj,
Yes.
Narcissa, Nadia,
Yes.
Terrell. My stab
Yes.
list is long. Taj is a murder.
Correct.
He is not a stabbing. He is a murder. Narcissa is a maiming.
I'm at peace with that.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
would like for somebody to Tanya Harding, Narcissa, and Nadia.
I
Um,
support that.
Terrell Terrell is a stab, and I have not decided. how bad his injury needs to be. But he for sure is on the list because he was never he was not practicing on his art. What did Dragonfly Jones
Correct.
say? he was
Correct.
not he was not practicing on his art, and he was just leaving her willy nilly all the time, and I disagreed with it wholeheartedly. What about you?
Correct. No, I agree. And I was like, Terrell, come on now, bro. We're rooting for you, but you
Yeah,
just
like I
keep
thought you was gonna
dropping
get
the
with
ball.
Van. Like,
Yeah. But I
keep
agree with
going.
all of the other candidates. And one of our final questions is always, what questions do you still have, right? And my number
Hmm.
one question was, did someone whoop JR's ass for selling
I
out his
sure hope
teammate?
so.
Right. I want his life ruined. I want his life completely
He's a maiming as
ruined.
well. Yeah, he's a maiming as well.
Yeah. And it's just, that you would, but we've seen this, right? Where
Yeah,
people just make some of the dumbest, they just
yeah,
torpedo their lives on some petty,
yep.
you know, jealous nonsense, and get themselves wrapped up in not, and ruin their lives. So I was just like,
Hmm.
I just want to know that that someone touched him, because we know he's facing criminal charges, right? We know he's, likely gonna get kicked off the team, even though that wasn't specifically articulated. Lons wouldn't have been playing that. Eli Richardson wouldn't have
Right,
been playing that.
right,
So
right.
football career,
Over.
hopefully done. But
Hmm.
did someone touch him? Please,
I certainly
please,
hope so.
someone touch him.
I hope he woke up in the middle of the night to somebody standing over him. That's what I hope.
Exactly, exactly. And can we just, give props where props are due for the smooth way that Ambrose handled, right,
Yes.
the 911 call. And it was a sister reader who like did a GIF, a meme, I think, of Ambrose making his 911 call, talking about, yeah, some bitch ass shot me. And I was like, yes, because Ambrose, cool as a cucumber, and talking about some bitch ass shot me.
Listen,
And I was just like, yes, I don't like, really. He took it like a G. God
for
bless him. He
sure,
took it like a G.
for sure. Did you
Um,
have a favorite character, and if so, who was it?
Say, I loved everyone, but Cheyenne in particular really gave me life, right?
Mm.
She just, every time she was on the page, I chuckled. And in particular, when kind of going back into the Thanksgiving scene, when she and it's reminiscent of Lakin's comment to Karis in Equivalent Exchange about when we go high, right? So hearkening
Mm-hmm.
to the Michelle Obama quote about when they
Mm-hmm.
go low, we go high. It's like, nah, when they go low, I'm getting in the gutter, I'm dragging their ass heavy, right?
Uh-huh.
And I was like, that's right, Cheyenne, that's right. Lakin kind of said something similar. He was like, you stay up high to catch me up, but I'm getting right down there with them, when
Exactly.
they go low. And that's a sentiment that I think many of us share when
Mm-hmm.
something like this happens. You're like, it sounds good talking about taking a high road, but nah, I'm getting the gutter with them. So I just like Cheyenne,
Yeah.
obviously being a ride or die mom. And nothing tops the Thanksgiving scene, right? It just
Yeah, the
is what it
Thanksgiving
is
thing
with
was
that.
everything.
Yeah.
Everything. Um, I did not have a favorite character, and I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, yeah.
I think I connected with the whole village, with both of their villages. I connected with them. Um, and I don't, there was not a standout because I try to take it as a whole, like the perfect bite. Like you have to have the macaroni and cheese and the sweet potatoes and the stuffing and the turkey and the ham all on one fork or whatever your favorite bite is, like on
Hmm.
Thanksgiving or whatever. Like, so there's not one, I couldn't pick one to say because then you mess up the bite.
Yeah.
I feel like this was ambitious and I think she did a great job.
So how about who do you want to get their own book?
I want to see, is Atlas new? Did I miss Atlas?
Yes. See,
I
see,
want
this is
Atlas to
where
get
we're
his own
sharing a
book.
brain. Because I too want Atlas, right? I want Atlas to get his own book too. Because I was like, I
Yeah.
want to know more about Atlas. Yes.
Yeah, I want him. He got two locations for the physical therapy practice. This is what I want him to be. I would like for him to be the love interest for, I think the next Sugar Valley book is going to be the woman whose husband was in the military and died. And
Oh, interesting.
and I can't think of her name, but because I read culmination of everything once a month. But anyway, I want I want him to be her love interest. Like I want there to be some kind of doctor connection with Kyle and Ben and him to be something something. I don't know. But sometimes I confuse I can't remember how far Blakewood is from the Heights is from Sugar Valley, so that might not be logical.
Okay, yeah, yeah,
Um
fair, fair.
but
But
yeah,
I
I
agree
want
with
Atlas
you.
to get his own book.
I agree with you. I want Atlas to get his own book.
If for no other reason than we can see Tegan and um, Ambrose again in a much less stressful situation.
That, and I also want to better understand the dynamic of
Yeah,
Atlas and Miss Vonda, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Since it
yeah.
was hinted at, right, we were given, flashes of the schism there. And
Yep,
then there's a comment that's made right after Taj and Ambrose have that confrontation. No, it was when Ambrose punched JR in the face, and the
yeah.
comment was made that they would have expected. I think Ms. Vonda or Amos says they would have expected that more so to come from Atlas. Atlas is the type that would hit
He's
someone
the
over a
hothead.
girl, and I was
Yeah,
like, okay,
yeah.
I wonder if there's something there. So I guess
I hope
when
so.
it's appropriate, we can ask CCJ. Is Atlas someone who's going to get his own story?
Yeah,
And I guess we'll wait and see what happens with that.
yeah.
Outstanding questions, because I gave you mine. Well, I gave you my first one
Ah,
about whether or not someone whooped JR's ass. I'll tell you my last two.
yeah. What are yours?
Um, and actually, just because Atlas, again, it comes back to Atlas about he's planning to open that second facility, and what's the status between him and Ms. Vonda's relationship, and
Yep.
then kind of staying in that family is Ambrose's relationship with Amos completely unchanged, or did that conversation,
Yeah.
after the shooting, did
Did they
that,
turn a corner?
yeah, was that the beginning of something,
Hmm.
and I'm fine whichever way it goes, but I am left with that question.